we're an organization that aims to break down barriers of entry to data and analytics overall. So we provide resources to data professionals, we provide training, workshops, speaker sessions, we do different content arcs, and actually that is what brings us to today's session. We just completed a content arc over the last couple of months, or really the last 6 months, of data in industry and what that means both within specific industries, but in comparison across industries. So how is data truly used in these specific use cases? How is it used in the wild, basically? So today we have Glenda, Randy, and Julie here to talk about what they do, how they interact with data, and really talk about the way that the rubber meets the road. So not just theoretical anymore, but how do you implement? How do you make compromises in workplaces where there isn't necessarily the best technology or the most money to really structure those capabilities that you're told should be the functionality. So I'll hand it over to them in just a moment to give their introductions. I know that usually here in this space, we go around and do introductions for everyone. Because this is a panel and because we want to make the most of our presenters' time, please, if you're interested in connecting, put all of your introductions, your socials in the chat here, and everyone is able to connect there. Also, throughout the presentation, throughout the conversation, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll call on you if you have questions, and feel free to speak up. However, if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, please put your question in the chat. I will be checking consistently, and if I see your question, I'll make sure to bring it up and make it available for our presenters to respond to. Okay, so that being said, we have Glenda, we have Julie, and we have Randy. If you guys could go ahead and give your introductions in that order, we'd love to hear about your background in data, what has brought you to the point in your career, and kind of how you interact with data in your daily lives.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, Amanda, and your data team for inviting me here, your data community. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I am the CEO and founder of Autism Health, and also working as a principal consultant with Amanda at CTI DATA, really, really great company. They really, really empower women and diverse backgrounds to really work on data. I've been in data pretty much probably over 20 years. I grew up with truly breaking a problem in numbers, probably at a very young age. So my affinity to data structure and solving problems is very high, right? So, and that permeated along my career. I've mentored, I've been a contributor, I've been a leader. I've played so many hats. So I'm just happy to be here tonight and learn and converse about data. That's all. I'm sure you all are also experts in your field, so happy to learn. Thanks.
Come up next. Hi everyone, I'm Julie. I'm more on the early career spectrum of things. My background is in environmental science, and then I have a master's in coastal environmental management with a certificate in geospatial analysis. So I've always lived in the sciences and the natural resources side of things. I graduated from Duke with my master's in 2022, so I've been working full-time for just over a year. So I work for Ramboll, which is an environmental consulting company, and I work in their natural resources group and work closely with their climate adaptation and coastal resiliency teams. So I think I started loving data as a kid in grade school. We had like an enrichment class, and we got into stocks and like into Excel and data sheets and things like that, and I've loved it ever since. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Happy to be here.
I'm Randy Gingeleski. I'm Ashley's brother, but I also lead perimeter security for Warner Brothers Discovery and control all web application firewall configuration for the whole company. And so all of the traffic for Max, HBO Max, Discovery Plus, CNN.com is all technically under my purview. We have about 100,000 different domain names worth of internet footprint, which is all logged to varying degrees, which in itself yields a lot of data, but also the actual firewall configurations that are all over the place, and what we spend, I guess most importantly, to keep all that going yields a lot more data. So I'm not a pure data person, but rely on it operationally. And I kind of was pulled into it when people keep asking me for numbers, and I had to figure out a way to produce them and make other people happy.
Awesome, thank you all. So as everyone can see, we have some really talented and skilled people on the call today. So the first thing I want to ask each of you, there are a few things that we interact with as far as data goes. There's the data that's available, and there's the data that actually makes an impact. So where do you see that interaction in the data that you work with, and kind of where do you see data that's common but not necessarily important versus data that makes an impact but is maybe a little difficult to get your hands on? You can take this in any order. Speak up, please.
Yeah, I can take that. And so I guess the nature of what I do could create a lot more data than I have available, but it would cost an obscene amount of money to actually log all of the data that we could log. And then in addition to just storing data for whatever period of time, you have to pay to index it and put it into Splunk or Kibana or something that makes it more accessible. And so this is something I've struggled with for a while, and it seems like there's a lot of economic belt tightening going on, and so it's getting more to the point where you have to be a bit crafty about how to grab data. And so it might not be in my case available in a nice like Splunk accessible format or something that has a complete picture. Something that I kind of learned the hard way years ago was people were asking me for numbers, and I was giving them numbers that I was getting out of a certain platform without realizing that the data itself was sampled. And so when other people started pointing out inconsistencies, that's when I really had to run things to ground and realize like, oh, okay, what I thought was a complete picture is actually just a partial picture. And so I think there are some very basic questions that you can ask regardless of what your data source is. And then knowing that really well gives you more options as to how you can approach your problems. And I think that's probably often overlooked. And then I spend a lot of time, and my team spends a lot of time writing scripts to just blast certain APIs of, if we pay for a tool that has an API that makes certain numbers available, it might be more feasible for us to just hack something together and continually pull that for data than rely on the cleaner logs that would be more expensive and a harder sell to the business to retain. And so I guess we take a hacky approach at times, but the lesson in there perhaps is to really just know what you have before you dive into the more fun part, which is the scripting and analysis and whatnot.
That makes sense. Robert, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question on Randy's answer. That was a very interesting position, Randy. You described yourself as being in, unless I misinterpreted that Randy, you're in a spot where you can decide what data is created versus what's let to slip into the ether, never to be seen again. And in that decision-making process, do you have, to your knowledge, the actual dollars that it would cost to store that quantity of data?
Yes, it can be a bit cryptic to arrive at that figure, but basically most of what I'm responsible for is in Amazon Web Services, and it's not necessarily in Amazon's interest to make it easy to understand what you're being billed for, especially with an employer that pays Amazon tens of millions of dollars a month. And so it's something that I've gone through great pains to understand better and try to communicate that to the people that decide whether I keep my job or not. And so I do think that there are certain things like the launch of the Max platform earlier this year, where that's kind of seen as like, oh, we'll spend whatever to retain that data. But there are some other properties where we might be able to optimize things more and give them better security coverage, but we don't have a complete picture of what's actually happening with the firewall that's configured in front of their properties today. And so my team might make an argument to log, at least for some period of time, more data there so that we can make a better assessment before we start reconfiguring things. But I would say it varies. And if you, I guess in most computer things, if you really spend the time to look into it, you can get down to those like really specific costs, whether that's in dollar values or just like performance cost of how long does it take to write something, or what latency is introduced by logging something. But you really need to stay at it and treat that as a high priority to get there, because it usually isn't easy.
Thank you. I've never had an actual, this is $3,000. Do you want to do it for storage versus this is important or not without a quantity? So thanks.
Yeah, so the mountain and the molehill is a big question in data. You know, how do you identify what to keep? So Julie or Glenda, do you have a perspective on that?
I'll go. So I work primarily in geospatial data. So a lot of what I do is pulling off of open source and what's online and available, and a little bit of our field teams are out in the field delineating wetland or something like that, and they're collecting data as well. And with both of those types, there's always the question of accuracy and resolution, and especially with data that we collect, a lot of that will influence permitting. So we're helping a client determine, you know, there's this many acres of wetlands on your site, and so this is the path for permitting that you'll have to take. And maybe if there's less than an acre, that's one path, and if it's more than an acre, it's a different path. So it's very important to understand the entire pathway of the collecting the data, how it's collected, making sure the GPS unit's working, and talking to the phone correctly and stuff like that, in order to take the correct pathway for the client. And obviously, if you mess that up, it's time and money, which is big. So, and then with data that's readily available, we're pulling from FEMA and USGS and NOAA all the time. And so, yes, those are reputable sources, but you have to fully understand the metadata and the resolution of the data and how it was created, in order to use it correctly and not come to, you know, incorrect solutions because you don't understand the actual source of that data.
So I'm gonna round that up a little bit, right? So especially with enterprise level kind of stuff, right? And when you have regulatory and requirements, GDPR and privacy requirements, right? You pretty much have to keep everything. I don't know, it's expensive, right? Especially in the financial industries, right? So then you're going to run into GDPR because there's a rule that you have to forget, right? So all that kind of stuff, right? So you have to de-identify and probably whatever that de-identification process is, right? Certain identities. So yeah, at the enterprise level, especially for big companies and even probably for higher ed, they keep everything. So especially when you're highly regulated, you can't repeat that, but it's an expensive process. So I can't hear her.
Amanda, you might be on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you so much. So that's a really interesting perspective, because there is a balance with open source data one of the caveats of open source data is that it might disappear tomorrow. But one of the benefits of it is you don't have to store it on-prem or on your cloud. So how do you weigh the pros and cons of maintaining within your storage versus understanding that if you have an open source one thing or the other, that it may disappear tomorrow?
I'll take that. I think in my case, it's more like I come across some open source data. I suppose the configurations that my team deploys, there are certain baselines that aren't really data intensive. They're not really changing. They're just kind of static and published every once in a while. And we'll try to compare those to what we're running internally and weigh whether there might be performance differences if we adopt certain things or move entirely to those standards. But we do have a case where we'll have certain vendors that make, I'll call them like simple data points available for the way things are performing with their tool. And we can either grab that via their API effectively for free, what we're already paying for the tool, or we could start logging a more specific, higher granularity of data ourselves, but incur the cost and complexity and all of that of bringing things in-house. And so I think that use case varies a lot, but it's also, I think people tend to look at that as like an all or nothing thing of like, oh, either we're going to bring this in-house or we're not going to have it. And I know I've been in a lot of situations where we might bring something in-house and start logging or saving more data for a period of time to accomplish some goal, whether that's optimization for security or cost or what have you. And then at other times we might just turn that off and shift our focus elsewhere. And so I think that can be freeing in a way to not necessarily think about it like, oh, if we move this here, we have to use it forever, or vice versa. If we rely on the open source data instead of having things first party, then we have to do that forever. It's more like, I would think of it through the lens of what your priorities and what you're hoping to accomplish, what that is shorter term. And then again, don't necessarily marry something long term that you don't need over that time horizon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've gotten a little weedsy in the last couple of minutes. So I want to bring it back up to kind of a more 30,000 foot view. So kind of how do you interact with data on a business level? Could each of you give an example of an interesting use case you have and kind of how that use case is perceived by your end users versus the aspects that you had to go through to get to that functional end user capability?
I can start. So we have a client that we're working on multiple sites for, and I'm going to bring it back to the wetland delineations again. So we have a lot of teams mobilized at a lot of different times out in the field delineating wetlands. And I wouldn't say that we have the best way to get things done right now, but basically they are dropping points on field maps, on the Esri Field Maps app, around wetlands and streams, and then I have the really fun job of connecting the dots and actually kind of hand delineating post field those wetlands and streams. And so the field teams are out there, they see the real thing, and all I get are these dots, right? So that's kind of the beginning of the process, and the end of the process is, you know, people like my manager and the client ultimately will see this really beautiful map of these great wetlands, and they're all out by like the type, PFO, PM, in the streams, and they have exact acreages and they're beautiful. But when I get it, it's just like I had up to like 5,000 points at one point that like I had to decipher and turn into what was actually there in an accurate manner, which is fun, very fun. So that's something that I definitely think. And then another piece of that is the streams. So originally we were just kind of creating lines from them, but then back to the permitting aspect, you need to know the actual widths and depths of them. So I added like that component to it, and so the managers are like, you can just easily, you know, change that, right? From lines to like an actual accurate down to the foot or whatever stream width. And I was like, no, you cannot do that. So I definitely think that it can be difficult at times for people to understand, like you said, the process that goes into like getting that beautiful end map that is easy to understand and accurate as well. So
Yeah, and you've mentioned GIS a couple times. I know that's, while it's a common type of data in certain industries, it is also rare to have the skill set for GIS data. And it's a very specific niche capability. Could you go into a little bit more about what GIS is and what it does?
sure, yeah. So GIS is, there's so many ways to describe this, but it's geospatial data. So it's data information that is connected to a location and place, and sometimes a certain time. So you can have species data. So say like in state parks, there's observations of different endangered species at a specific location in the park. That spatial data, maybe that's a point that someone can drop or create. That's spatial data. Other spatial data that I work with is soils data. So that's mapped and based off of soil borings, physical borings that were created in the field. And so, yeah, spatial data is data that's collected and tied to a location and can be used to kind of do time change analysis, but also create like a snapshot of, you know, what's occurring in a specific place at a specific time. That's kind of how I use it in the environment, in my current role, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who are familiar with the Syracuse Open Data Platform, which I know a few of you are, an example there of geospatial data is some of the water main data or the snowplow maps. So, you know, water main data is an example of static geospatial data, whereas the snowplow maps, similar to various migration paths of different species maps, they are migratory, so you'll be able to see the change in those spatial maps. Okay, Glenda, do you want to go into some use cases that you get to see both in your you know, in your consulting work, but also in your work with your specific company around autism?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so and maybe I should start with the use case and the people, right? So I truly believe in the power of data and technology to solve a lot of problems and help people, right? And at an organization level, you pretty much have the C-level all the way to the I call it the production floor sometimes. So I'm gonna you know, one of the wonderful things, and I'm gonna give you a very specific use case, is when I was at Harvard, right? I was building a lot of machine learning algorithms and data science predictive models, right? And the way to get there at a higher ed setting was to really build good relationships. A lot of the users don't know how to formulate a question. You have to help them, right? Listen a lot. Some of them are very also, oh, I know the question, but sometimes the question is wrong. So you kind of have to listen, right? I'm like, make certain recommendation. Is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? So then you can say, okay, a question like who is likely to give, right? X, you know, because you have the high givers, which are usually 500K or 1 million, and then you have the low givers that are usually probably 100K or less. So you kind of have to like suss it out and really truly listen to the use case and listen to the user, so then they trust you, because you know that if they trust you, they're going to implement your model. So that's one piece. And same thing with so I'm just going to break that up. So when you formulate the question, there's you'll hear right away that this is a supervisory learning model. The one that's exploration, the data don't know, it's open-ended, it's more unsupervised, right? So by listening, right, that saves you a lot of work, because otherwise you're just going to explore and theorize and hypothesize in this oceans of data. That helps you truly focus on the right stuff. So that was like an interesting use case that truly inspired me right throughout my career, and you know, really played with a lot of data sets like Zillow, was the other one, Zillow, Redfin, and at that time Trulia. And through that data and aggregation, right, I was using, I was able to build a wealth engine given those data sets, and therefore with that wealth formula, I was able to predict how they're likely to give at a certain time. So with that same thing, right, I started autism health. I've lived this experience because I'm a parent to an autistic child, right? So, and I'm owning it. So it's the same thing. It's like throughout the autism journey, right? There's so many data points, and it's a large ecosystem in terms of real estate, financial providers, experience. What else? Communities, right? Communities that are autism friendly or not autism friendly, or because an autism person needs so much across the spectrum and nobody's listening, right? So it's just kind of like, and there's like proprietary databases and secret databases, right? So what I've done, right, and it's it's patented, right? So we have collected a lot of proprietary databases, underground information, and public data sets to specifically aggregate all this information through an AI engine. And there's a lot of iterations to it. And really also present a UX that is so easy, right? For families to understand. So like at your mobile phone, you can pretty much say, this is what I need, this is where I am, this is my profile. The machine will recommend, right, the types of services that you need, which I don't know as a parent, and that information is not readily available. So it uses a lot of unsupervised learning, right? It also uses a lot of AI in terms of cleansing, and because quality is also important. So that's the use case of that. It's truly a very intuitive solution at the end. UX is very important, because if your UX is not easy and it takes so much to process, right, your users are going to bounce, right? They have this attention span, even with dashboards, right? They have an attention span of probably, I call it 30 seconds to a minute, right? So that's the art of what we do. Anyway, so hopefully that helps that discussion, and I was specific enough. Yep.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, as a cynic, I think you are being very generous to users' attention spans.
Exactly.
But you bring up a good point around unsupervised learning and these cutting edge technologies that are used in some instances because either they're very beneficial or they are very buzzwordy. And it sounds very beneficial in your use case. But yeah, Julie and Ryan, I'd love to hear your thoughts about AI and unsupervised learning in your industries, and whether you think that is a true application or it's a bit buzzwordy.
Yeah, I know that AI in general is a big topic that we're currently discussing. There's kind of a I don't know anything about the writer's strike or the actors guild or whatnot. I know there's a whole separate discussion on a very different side of the company I work for around that. But from the IT software perspective, we've kind of blanket blocked a lot of generative AI at the moment, like GitHub Copilot, and really things that help along software development. My team is so focused on firewall. We're not so concerned about like applications of that against us at this time. I know that elsewhere in the security field, there's concern about generative AI helping malware development or social engineering or applications like that, which aren't so well intended. But I think that we are moving more towards, at least in the generative AI case, since that's very current for us right now, to a happy medium where we'll use some of these large language models and other like large generic models, but with the stipulation or the guardrails that the data that we feed into it and that generally changes the model in some way needs to stay within our own environment. And I know that AWS and the other major public cloud providers are clamoring to offer those sorts of opportunities to us. We've also have various relationships with like big four consulting firms like Deloitte, and I know that they're also trying to present their views on this to us. And so I think that it's kind of for us something where it's so new that from the general like cybersecurity department's point of view, we had to take the stance of cutting it off to begin with, but that will cautiously start to adopt it more. And that's not just for really the data analysis use case, but really more towards helping software developers be more productive, and then some of those just wide-ranging AI use cases. But again, it is something that we're approaching in a risk-averse nature.
I'll second that for sure. I don't have any cases right now where I'm personally using unsupervised learning or AI, but I touched on it a little bit in grad school with drones and satellite imagery. But there's definitely a lot of interest in AI and its applications to our field. But like Randy said, we are very concerned about protecting our data and our clients' data, and we want to do it in a way that we can keep that in-house and protect all of that data, and also just find the most efficient uses for AI. So like in a project I'm about to start, we wanted to do some classification of sediment samples. So like take pictures of, if anyone's heard of Chimney Bluff State Park, we're going to be doing physical sediment samples of Chimney Bluffs and a few other bluff systems along Lake Ontario. But we also wanted to take pictures to get some of those larger sediments that we wouldn't be pulling physical samples of. And from those pictures, we wanted to have a model classify those sediments for us and the percent of coarse fragments. But since we're only taking like 100 pictures, that's not even close to enough to train a model, let alone to get it to be accurate enough to give us the answer we want. So figuring out exactly how to apply it and when to apply it is a question that I feel like we're working on in our industry right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially with the not strange in the way that it's, not necessary, but strange in the way that it hasn't necessarily happened before, where there are concerns over content creation and build of things from unsupervised learning and AI about where do we reach the point where there's a significant amount of benefit we can get from these programs in reducing the thousands and thousands and thousands of years it would take 30 million data analysts to ever discover anything about a data set versus building something from the ground up that someone could do in 30 days versus a computer can do in 3. So that's a really interesting point to bring up about risk, concerns when it comes to the potential for, for impact on specific individuals and creativity. Tim, it looks like you have your hand raised. Tim? No, we can't hear you, but if you want to put your question in the chat, I can ask it for you. Cool. Well, Tim types out his question. I think Robert has a really interesting question about imposter syndrome, which I don't know about all of you, but I feel on a daily basis.
Me too.
So I'd love to hear all of your experiences around imposter syndrome, how it's impacted the way that you approach your career, and potentially how it's even, been beneficial to your career growth.
Yeah, I'll start on that. I recently inherited the team that I'm now in charge of within the last couple of weeks, and so I think that in becoming a manager or a people leader, as I've been called here now, that's something that's causing a lot of imposter syndrome at the moment. But really, I guess whenever I've taken on a new role, I think I started my career as a software engineer, and then I transitioned into security, and then I went from being a traveling consultant to doing what we'd call in-house product security, which I've been doing the last handful of years. And I think whenever, especially I've had a change in role or a change in seniority, like an internal promotion, I think that's really spurred a lot of imposter syndrome. And I think what grounds me a lot of the time is having candid discussions with other people. Usually the peers seem to be the most helpful in these matters, but if you talk to the other people that you're working with and that you trust, you can usually find that they feel the same thing as you do. And I think it's something that we all feel, and maybe some hide it better than others, but that's something that's been strangely comforting to me. But again, does rely on really just forming connections with other people and having that safe place to discuss something first. But really being able to speak with somebody who's adjacent with you, closer to your role, the better that seems to help. But I do think, again, it's something that we all feel. So you're certainly not alone.
I feel like it's a fuel for growth, right? I don't know, that's how I look at it, right? So I don't know not to have it. I mean, I don't know, I've been on this planet for a longer time, probably than you all have. So I don't know how to. Yeah.
Sure. I absolutely feel that 100% on the day to day. And Randy makes a great point of just connecting with others is massive in kind of turning those feelings down. And I think that, so I'm fully remote in my position, and sitting alone by yourself working, especially like as soon as you're out of grad school and full time for the like all by yourself, can get really daunting, especially if if you're not connecting with others. So it's been a huge thing for me to just reach out to other people that are doing the same things as me and kind of talk through those things. And it's a big confidence builder to hear that, they're going through the same things as I am. And then another piece of that maybe makes it worse is when your manager maybe doesn't have the same knowledge as you. So they're trusting you and relying on you to create a data product, and then they're showing it to the client, and it's on you to have it correct, and they're not necessarily going to recognize whether or not it's incorrect. That can flare up the imposter syndrome quite a bit. So definitely on that train. So.
Understood. That is difficult. And yeah, going straight from grad school into a fully remote role, I mean, not having that capability of designing a baseline with your coworkers, that is less professional and more just like, you know, water cooler talk.
Exactly.
That's hard. I am cheesy, but I love Ted Lasso. And there's this scene in Ted Lasso where he's playing darts with someone who underestimated him, uh, and one of the things he talks about while he is dominating this person in darts who underestimated him is he talks about how the people who made him feel like an imposter are the people who didn't really know what they were talking about, and they you know, they really weren't interested in learning more about the world and curious. And I think that applies to our profession pretty significantly. You know, we're people who are curious. That's why we're into data, because we get to learn more from it every single day. And so it's easy to feel unsteady in a world where you have to constantly question your judgment because it's being corrected by the data you look at every day. So I'm glad to be in a group of people who I can commiserate with. Okay, so I want to get back to Tim's question. So this is specifically for you, Julie. So you get all the data you need from sediment samples just by photographing them in the field without having to take them back to the lab. Is that accurate? Do you have to bring more things in for testing? How does that work?
So we haven't actually enacted this yet, but we will also be taking physical samples for the like finer grain sediments. The idea or the hope we had with just using photographs was to get those coarse grain fragments, so sand and larger, so like think like boulders and rocks that are throughout the bluff system. So in that case, if we had enough pictures and big enough training data set to train a model, we believe we could have parsed out the fragment or percentage of those coarse fragments in the pictures. So I believe it's possible. It's just we won't be doing it this time, unfortunately. Sad. I'll be doing it manually.
Right. And it's all about that technological growth and the ability to, and actually, this is one of the last questions I wanted to put out to you guys. Budget is always a concern. How do you mitigate budget with the needs of the work that you have to get done, and how you make those decisions of allocation, especially when you know that there are so many things you have to do in antiquated systems and legacy institutions. And I know the consultants on the call know that as you go into a new client, it's hard to look at their stack because it's concerning. And I'm sure, Randy, you see the same thing where you're in a legacy institution that has built up across the years and probably hasn't done true data transformation in a long time. So how do you mitigate that?
Yeah, I think that in my case, I've been lucky enough to have this sort of easy, because if you know the history of Warner Brothers Discovery, the last time we merged would have been April of last year when Warner Media and Discovery came together. But before that, at least on the Warner Media side, there were a bunch of changes from like Time Warner to Turner to all these different name changes, and you'd have different brands that were kind of treated almost like a separate company. And when I first started, I had purview over just HBO Max, and that was very much just a walled garden that almost behaved like a startup within the rest of Warner Media, and so it had its own security team and all these different functions that were different from other parts of the business. And certain technologies were the same there, but other things were different on purpose. And so I think that in my case, especially in my current role, I've assumed control of all of the web application firewall, but there are at least 3 different flavors of that in use. And because of all of this merging activity, it's never really been centralized in the way that my current team is doing it and trying to collect data and visibility just over, again, we have like all these domain names, over 100,000 in my estimation, and we have a requirement that anything internet facing should have WAF. And so kind of the most basic data point is, are we covering everything that should have this in place? And then from there we go to performance data. And my team within the last 6 months identified some easy opportunities to optimize for cost by turning off redundant rules. So there wasn't an impact to security. We didn't really have to justify it so much, besides showing that in certain rule sets things were redundant, and we projected that'll save the company millions of dollars a year. And so my team gets the credibility of, we've already saved a lot of money, and I think that takes some heat off of us in asking for more things, especially if, like I mentioned earlier, it could be temporarily we want to log more data in a certain area just to really ascertain what our performance is. And so it's been easy on my part, but I think also it's kind of a matter of really knowing the fundamentals of, like, if I'm working with something unfamiliar, what are the data points available? How can I map that to the other like flavors of firewall that I have? So what are the common points between those that I could use? And then like I mentioned earlier, another point that would trip me up is something sampled? Am I seeing the complete picture? And again, I think really knowing those fundamentals helps. And if you're trying to make an argument to the business that you need something, I think that usually if you can tell the story in the right way and really break it down to the core numbers, hopefully the powers that be will listen. But again, I feel like I've been lucky in this arena, and so definitely it might be more of an uphill battle in other cases.
I can jump in. So I'm at a position right now where I'm not necessarily influencing budget or putting in my 2 cents for this task is going to take me this much time. So a lot of times I'm thrown into something and told you have this much time and you have to make it work. But in other cases, you get the question of, okay, so how long is this going to take? And working with any data is the case, but also especially geospatial data, and people that work in GIS know if you say this is going to take 5 hours, it's probably going to take 15 or 20. So my biggest challenge thus far has been giving myself a good enough buffer of, this is how long it could take me, and staying within that while also trying to be as efficient as possible, because as consultants, it's always about budget, time is money, and we want to get products to our clients as quickly as possible. So definitely been a challenge I've been trying to work through lately. So
Right, you gotta log your billables, but you can't go over your project budget. What about you, Glenda?
I'm gonna flip it a little bit in a startup environment, like where I am, like I'm pre-revenue, right? I have no budget, but I have milestones to hit, right? So my time is free. No, it's not. So if I put value to my time because it's a passion one, right? I'll probably be over budget, right? But our commitment right now from a startup environment is to deliver really good products. So I have a team, right? And most of them are offshore, right? So that's one. I'm not I'm not saying, right, so that's the best way. I'm just going to describe you my current state, right? Because I have to have hit certain milestones in terms of revenue, right, or pre-rev stages or pre-rev targets, right? So a lot of my cost are, I have a UX team in Ukraine, I have a data team in India, right? But my time is spread all over the place. So the over budget is really my time in my view, but I have to do that and just really roll up my sleeves, right? And that's the startup mindset, especially in the pre-seed, pre-rev budget mindset. Now that's gonna change after probably a year, right? I always say after a year, I'm not gonna make money. I'll probably make money year two, right? Because you have to expand the business. So my budget will change probably in next year, right? The year after that, because I have to hit the milestones. So that's not very specific, but that's how that's how it is, right? So my time is over budget and my time is not free. I have to remember that. Otherwise, my advisors will say, you know, you have to have a higher valuation for the company because our time is not free. So skip that.
Right, and that becomes a very different conversation for those who are in their first 5 years, as opposed to those who have had organizations built for generations. You know, you when you're in a startup, you identify that your first 5 years are free so that your third 5 years, so 10 through 15, are exponentially expensive. So that's definitely a different mindset than you're an established organization that is doing genuine annual budgets and trying to feed out money based on your previous year's revenue. Okay, so we're at 7:56. I do want to make a quick couple of announcements before handing it over to the audience for any of your final questions. Okay, so 1, November, Open Data Day, Syracuse. It is in person. It is run by the city of Syracuse. Ashley and I will be delivering a presentation. I'll be talking about data in society, and Ashley will be giving a workshop on that. So we're going to be talking about how Twitter data affects your daily lives and all of these other aspects of, I own a home. I get an email once every week or so from Redpin telling me how much my home is worth. So all these different aspects of how data impacts your daily life. 2, the next couple of months, October, November, December, we are not going to do ARCs. We are doing ad hoc workshops, presentations, speaker sessions. If you have anything you're interested in, or if you are interested in presenting, please let us know, and we can work that out. We haven't planned anything yet, but are continuing to work through those plans. So let us know if you want to be involved or if you have interests, and we can reach out to people that can help with those interests. And 3, starting January, we want to start a new ARC for the new year. So if you have ARC interests, we'll probably put a poll up on our LinkedIn again, like we did last year, asking what people are interested in. But if you have specific interests, please just reach out and we can make sure to either add it to the poll, or if we get enough interest, please just let us know and we can make it our ARC. Okay, I'm done. Any questions?
Well, thank you for having me.
For giving us good conversation, but like we said, the different industries of like Amanda and I have our perspective of where we're coming from, but it's always good to get input from where you all have experience in. And
Absolutely.
as Amanda mentioned before, if anyone has a hard stop, definitely like feel free to drop off. But if anyone wants to just unmute if they have a question or post in the chat, or you can use the hand raise function either.
And if there are no questions, thank you so much to our panel. You have been extremely informative. Obviously, everyone on the call was very engaged. You got a lot of questions and you were able to answer them with details that I know I wouldn't have been able to provide. I don't know about Ashley or anyone else on this call, but we really appreciate the time that you spent. We know that your time is precious.
Yeah, thank you all. Those great answers. I sound weird with headphones on. Holy cow.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great month and we'll see you in October.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.